Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I'm Aparna from IT Bombay, and I'm going to discuss about city imagined, city and cinema. This module comes under paper Sociology of Urban Transformation. So after discussing this lecture, you will be able to discuss relationships formed by the city and the cinema. The module discusses how city as a physical form and social form has been imagined, has been represented, and has been portrayed and shown in cinema. The model broadly discusses urban social relations, urban behavior patterns, and urban issues, issues of housing, crime, land, and how urban representations in films have changed over time. You might have watched several films at home and must have been to cinema halls and multiplexes. You might have watched films of different genres: sci-fi, action, thriller, romance, and films from other languages and nations. For example, French, Italian, Korean, Nigerian, and American. So often we remember actors, songs, storyline, a few scenes, and dialogues. Cinema has potential to influence us the way we look at people, the way we look at social relationships, and understand various aspects of everyday social life. For a long time in academics, cinema as subject of analysis remained neglected. It was Walter Benjamin who considered the similarity between city and cinema. One may begin to ask, why shall we read cinema and consider it for sociological analysis? How does cinema portray social reality, and how does it correspond to everyday life? What topics and subjects dominate cinematic representations? How has city as a physical and social cultural space been shown in cinema? Do cinematic representations influence city planning, or urban layout, or urban social relations? So in this module, we are going to consider cinema as an important subject as it helps us understand various facets of social world. Cinema is not only entertainment but also a dominant cultural form. It helps us to know various dimensions of everyday life, of various dimensions of social structures and institutions. It is city where cinema as a technique and as an art form and as an entertainment medium and as mass production industry has emerged and grew. So in fact, rise of cinema coincides with the emergence of modern urban society. However, cinema, despite being important, remained neglected in the academic explorations for a long time. Even if it was considered, we often looked at the measurable effects of the film. This module draws attention towards cinema, that how society in general and urban world in particular could be understood. We do not discuss subjective experiences of the audience or history of cinema or cinematic techniques. It's about an attempt to understand the alchemy of cinema and city, the relations cinema and city form, and how they influence each other. The model is also a modest attempt to highlight dominant trends that are portrayed about urban world. In doing so, the model emphasizes how cinema influences urban physical landscape as well as imaginations of urban social life. It does not make tangential observation of city on the screen, but discuss how deeply city is imbued in cinematic representations. Indian films, since early on, showcased physical and built environment and shown urban social relationships, urban mentalities, urban attitudes and behavior, and urban landscapes. So nevertheless, there was a celebration of rural, and often the city life was denounced and criticized. In doing so, we'll explore why the city of Bombay, which is now Mumbai, it dominated the screen, and how and as well as why in the recent times the attention is shifting to other cities and towns. Of course, the shift away from a metropolis of mofussil towns definitely has impacted the change in topic as well as subject. In this essay, it is quite difficult to trace urban representations of other cities like Calcutta and Madras. Therefore, there is an over-representation of Bombay in this module, an over-representation of examples from Bollywood films. This module also touches a few important movies from Europe, America, and Asian film industries, and discuss how urban has been represented in films from these regions. City and world cinema. As said earlier, cinema emerged in the cities, but the growth of modern cities is also associated with cinema. Almost every country has some or other city which function as the center of film production. Paris, Moscow, Berlin, New York, London are the cities where cinema grew in the beginning. In colonies also, a few cities became the site of production and distribution of cinema. For example, Bombay in India, Lagos in Kano in Nigeria. These cities still function as important sites for the production and distribution of films. The genesis of cinema in the city is not incidental. Cities contributed in the development of cinema by providing space, audience, and finance. Cities provided space where extravagant theaters could be established. Cinema also provided urban dwellers an important entertainment medium, created ancillary jobs and imaginations for city developers and planners. On 25th December 1895, Lumiere Brothers publicly screened 50 seconds movie image on the screen in Paris, which created a kind of uproar and sensation that later filmmakers and theatre owners appropriated. However, it was not the first time that images were screened. Long before the development of static theatres, there were touring film shows that used to project the images on the screen. Before the emergence of films as a medium of entertainment, peep shows, penny arcades, and kaleidoscope were made by people for entertainment. Nevertheless, in historical sense, film is a novel product which involves distinctive method of production as well as narrating a story. Film is an applied chemistry that involves photochemical process for the production of images. Therefore, film is a manufactured object that has a large industrial base and involves complex production process. Production of movies depends on specialization as well as division of labor that involves specialists at each level: pre-production, production, and post-production. Cinema is a modern mass production industry that follows Fordist assembly line system. There is a clear-cut division of labor and works. The work is divided for various people involved in the production and distribution of cinema. If you look at cinema halls in city, you would find a variety of theaters. Some of these offer posh, expensive, and world-class leisure, while several others neither have good interiors nor a great facade. For last decade or so, a number of changes around cinema theaters seem to have developed. Multiplex chains are replacing erstwhile cinema halls, and many of the cinema halls that were used by poor have either been closed down or refurbished that systemically drives them out. Cinema is an urban phenomenon. Cinema as a medium and cultural form conjoins with various spirits of modernity. Film industry is involved in cultural production at industrial level and contributes towards global economy. As Larson suggests, with their representations of life in the big city, cinema became powerful socialization agencies, indirectly educating their audiences in the ways of the world, emphasizing the rules and norms of urban life, presenting model situations, model forms of behavior. Therefore, films have a language, and this language is usually the language of the cities that need to be learned, not only in a city, but by living in the city. Because movies, on a more fundamental level, are constructed to match basic urban forms of perception and experience. City and cinema are connected in a variety of ways and often offers ambivalent understanding. As Walter Benjamin says, film is a social institution that answers the need for simulation created by general stress of urban life. Similarly, film may function as criticism of the very same urban conditions. From the early days on, films concentrated on issues of urbanity as a distinct lifestyle, urban landscapes, and urban social relationships. The upheaval created by modernity and shocking experiences of modern urban world formed the subject matter through which emergent social forms were showcased. Films such as Metropolis in 1927, The Third Man 1949, Superman 1978, Escape from the New York 1981, and Blade Runner in 1982 showcase urban dystopia and map ideological values and class structure of upper and lower social worlds. The transformations in the city and the emerging character of modern cities were shown in other movies, such as Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, Modern Times, and present varied experiences of modernity in the city. As it has been discussed earlier, cinema and city are inextricably linked to each other at different levels. Sheelan Fitzmaurice chart this relationship at three levels: thematic, formal, and industrial. Thematically, as Sheelan Fitzmaurice argue, cinema has been completely fascinated with the representation of the distinctive spaces, lifestyles, and human conditions of the city. It is the linking as well as treatment of the distinctive cultural representation that made deep association between cinema and city. Noticeably, most of the films take urban issues and subjects for its representation and screening. Urban sites such as the street, the skyline, the bar were important markers of cities in early cinema. Sheehan and Fitzmaurice also discuss formal relationship between city and cinema. Cinema has a long striking and distinctive ability to capture and express the spatial complexity, diversity, and social dynamism of the city through a mise-en-scene, location, filming, lighting, cinematography, and editing. Natural landscapes form an important component in films. Many destinations have been captured and popularized by cinema. Movie makers used new cities to show in the movies. For example, Haussmann's Paris was used to capture authentic urban experience. The city and cinema has economic relations which can be discerned at two levels: cultural geographies of the city and cultural economies of the cities. Films contribute a lot in the economy of the city through creation of ancillary jobs and generating entertainment tax. The filmmakers also depend on finance they receive from various production houses, advertisements that are available in the cities. The production, distribution, and screening of movies also generate money for the cultural and entertainment industry. Sheila Fitzmaurice say that all over the world, cinema has long played an important role in the cultural economies. Alongside, cinema also contributes in the projections of cities, or to say it differently, in the cultural geographies of the city. Over time, various cities are associated with specific cultural aspects, such as Paris as city of love, Bombay as city of dreams, and Belfast as divided city, and so on. In the West, transformations in society ushered in the emergence of cinema. Majumdar suggests that the success of early cinema in the West lay in its capacity to combine technological innovation with an ability to respond to the new social forms of metropolitan life. It has already been established that encounter with modernity in colonies was quite different from that what was experienced in the West. Indian society, or for that matter other non-Western countries, experienced modern capitalism, modern industrialization and urbanization very differently. The givenness of modern West's experience does not have any reference point for India. Even the depiction and projection of same spaces acquire different meanings and purposes. For example, as Majumdar suggests, the street in Western cities are replaced by footpath in Indian cities. Various Bollywood movies have captured the above mentioned spirit of Indian footpath. One can easily recall the dimensions in the song sequence Dil Ka Hal Sune Dilwala from Raj Kapoor's Shri 420, which is formed on the footpath. So the footpath of Bombay becomes a mimic village, a part of village community, part of a cosmopolitan city street, a symbolic organizer of a set of contradictory impulses that generates intense performance. So, this representation and accommodation of village community in Bollywood is largely an outcome of the imaginations of India by the political leaders of that time. The decade after independence showcased village as a space and celebrated rural life. Often, the contrast between rural and urban became an important element of cinema. The usual depiction of urban was a careless world that does not value social relations, and people lead a materialistic and immoral life. The march of development and modernization was in diametric opposition with rural simplicity. B.R. Chopra's Naya Daur is a perfect example of this contradiction. The leaders, nationalists as well as cosmopolitanists like Tagore, they offered ambivalent place to cities and cinema. For Tagore, cinema, which was called as bioscope during that time, advocated for the use of the bioscope as a tool for nation building that effectively be used to propagate the spirit of Swadeshi in rural India. Perhaps accommodation of rural in cinema socialized urban migrants to understand and avoid shock experience of urban life and also to adjust with modes of urban social relationships. Vasudevan, for instance, rightly says, in the films of 1950s, the self-image of nation was forced to confront several instances of dislocation, which complicated the issue of national identity. In films like Shri 420, Avara, Bazi, and Qismat, a modern sense of space and movement is negotiated even as the narratives yearn for security of world loss through uprootedness. Thus, city in Indian imaginary has occupied an ambivalent, confrontational, as well as a contemplative space that signifies modernity and its concrete promise as well as else. As said earlier, there is an overrepresentation of Bombay in Bollywood Hindi cinema. The city of Bombay, its urban landscape, inhabitants, issues, and problems, they took a center stage in Hindi Bollywood films. The places and buildings such as Victoria Terminus, which is now called as Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus, Marine Drive, Bombay Central, Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation, they all became representative icons of the city. The opening scene of several movies showcase these places. Similarly, a local transportation like Best Brihan Mumbai Electric Supply and Transport Undertaking, Best Buses, and Mumbai local trains, they also got space on the celluloid space. So, in fact, Bombay acquired the status of poster Indian city. Urban environment for Zimmel produces ambivalence. It is alienating, as it is liberating. The alienating urban environment is a different experience for urban residents. The working mechanisms of urban society, the community life, and everyday urban life stand opposite to the life in countryside. The anonymity in urban social and community life offers space for breaking the bondage and restrictions of community surveillance. Echoing the characteristic features of urban life, Kaviraj asserts, the city for most people was a far more mixed and complex arena of experience. It certainly produced hopelessness and despair, but it was also a space in which anonymity gave a sense of freedom from restrictive village customs. It was enjoyed by most characters in the films as a context in which genuine love could be experienced against the deterrence of deprivation and social and cultural taboos. However, such theoretical delineations in Indian context need to be approached carefully. The movement from village to city might have offered freedom from immediate family and communities surveillance, but the village customs, values, and habits were carried to the cities as well. In fact, the mohallas, neighborhoods, and communities that developed in the cities did not offer a very different gaze. People still used to gossip, and it was very difficult to maintain anonymity. Rishikesh Mukherjee's Millie is an apt example. I said earlier, there is an overrepresentation of Bombay in Bollywood. The city of Bombay, its urban landscape, inhabitants, issues, and problems took a center stage in film, especially Hindi films. The place is an Buildings such as Victoria Terminus, which is now known as Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus, Marine Drive, Bombay Central, Brihanmumbai Municipal Corporation, they become representatives icons of the city. The opening scene of several movies showcase these places. Similarly, local transportation, that is BEST, Brihanmumbai Electric Supply and Transport Undertaking, BEST buses and Mumbai local train also got space on the celluloid space. In fact, Bombay acquired the status of poster Indian city, cinematic city, and real city. In this section, we'll briefly take up a few aspects of urban life in Bombay that has been screened through Indian films. There is no such chronology that we are following, but it is an attempt to see how different issues have been represented in different time periods. As Mazumdar suggests, that social and political events in everyday life coexist in Bombay cinema, not as discrete categories, but as labyrinth of experience shaping the cartography of the cinematic city. This section discusses modern cities in India and how cultural modernity manifests in social space of Indian city. Towards the end of this section, we'll discuss a few important films that are located in other cities in as well as outside India. And this section delineates urban life as it unfolds through the songs and storyline of film. Unlike Calcutta, which is infamously called Duswapnir Nagari, City of Nightmares, Bombay is often called Mayapuri, the city of Maya, of illusion. It is simply called Swapnir Nagari, the city of dreams. It is the characterization of the city in cinema that defines social, political, and economic life in the city. Raj Kapoor's Shri 420 is one of the early films that granted an ambivalent character to the city. The opening scene of the film announces the character of Bombay as 420, which derived from Indian Penal Code section 420, that means someone who is cheat. As soon as the protagonist reaches the city, he is found in a crowded marketplace amidst people and cars. Raj meets a beggar on the street and asks, क्यों भाई तुम्हारे बॉम्बे में सब बहरे बसते हैं क्या? And the beggar answers, बहरे भी और अंधे भी. इनके कान कुछ नहीं सुन सकते सिवा रुपयों की खनकार के. ये बॉम्बे है मेरे भाई, मुंबई. यहाँ बिल्डिंगें बनती हैं सीमेंट की और इंसान के दिल पत्थर के. यहाँ एक ही देवता पूजा जाता है और वो है पैसा. This negative characterization of Mumbai sounds like Zimmer's characterization of urban inhabitants, with blasé attitude, money-minded, calculative, and alienated. Similar dialogue, that Mumbai does not belong to anyone, is often repeated in Indian Hindi cinema. The city atmosphere does not allow people to create belongingness. It is often shown that the city life alienates people from social world. People became money-minded and look at social relations in calculative manner. Similarly, in a recent film, Life in a Metro, an actor says, ये शहर हमें जितना देता है, बदले में कहीं ज़्यादा हमसे ले लेता है. Whatever the city gives us, in return it takes much more from us. The apathy of city residents and insulated behavior of people is very well played in Dilip Kumar's film, Mashal. Similarly, Raj Kapoor's Jagte Raho in 1956 explores the crime, greed, and corruption of residents in a chawl. The love-hate spirit for the city is one of the prominent features of Hindi cinema. This feeling has reflections in the lyrics of several films that present different facets of city life. In the song from the film CID 1956, "ऐ दिल है मुश्किल जीना यहाँ जरा हटके जरा बच के ये है बॉम्बे मेरी जान." The lyrics communicates the bodily rhythms of a person walking through a crowded Indian city, full of unruly, jostling crowds on the pavements and traffic on the streets. The anonymity within the city, strangeness, and its dynamism does not allow people to develop relationship. People in the city are often running and do not look at other fellows. In the film, Gaman, the song, सीने में जलन आंखों में तूफान सा क्यों है इस शहर में हर शख्स परेशान सा क्यों है? These lines show the pathos of the life of city residents. The song pictures a migrant taxi driver who laments the emotional quality of life in Mumbai. One of the important features of urban life that received prominence is apathy, immorality, heartlessness, and cunningness in conniving urban residents. Housing in Mumbai have remained an interesting subject, the film Gharonda and the song. एक अकेला इस शहर में रात में और दोपहर में आबोदाना ढूंढता है आशियाना ढूंढता है. Similarly, in the film Dastak, the issue of housing and struggle of a couple to find a decent house in Mumbai has been shown very beautifully. The urban inequality and economic difference within the city received varied treatments in Hindi cinema, often depicted through slum youths called Tapori. Slums have often been given an important place in the films. Films such as Salam Bombay, Dharavi, Chakra, Slumdog Millionaire, and many other move around the lives of slum dwellers and life in slums. The slums and slum dwellers often have been projected as places and people who are involved in crime and unlawful activities. Crime in the city has received varied treatments in Indian films. The city of Mumbai saw a phase of organized crime and work of the underworld. Some of the important films such as Satya, Company, Shooter at Lokhandwala showcase Mumbai underworld. Similarly, criminals, thieves, local goons, mafias, and their work have received important treatment in films such as Parinda, Ghayal, and Ghulam. Slums are shown as a site of resistance. Slum is that place where the hero, one who is moral, emerges and resists the immoralities of politicians and builders. Slums are not only spaces occupied by the migrants and the poor, but are also valuable land that are encroached by poor. The builders' politicians tussle with people to displace them and occupy the land to build lavish houses and apartments for the consumption of middle classes. Slums in films have often been found struggling with issues of urban governance, land encroachment, water crisis, poverty, and displacement. One of the prominent issues tackled in the films was the issue of land and displacement of poor from the city. The 1980 was also a time period when Mumbai, as an industrial city, saw longest strike of mill workers. Some of the films, such as Aghat, responded to the issue raised by trade unions. In many of the 1980s films, the land mafia, police, and businessmen tried to occupy slums, and often they would use the system to displace them. In post-reform periods, such issues receive a different dimensions. In the film Ghosla Ka Ghosla, the issue of land grabbing comes to the fore, which is quite prevalent in the cities such as Delhi and NCR. Of late, movies have started deriving locations, subject matter, and story from cities other than Mumbai. In fact, the local as well as the global are accommodated in the movies. The cities from Europe and America in the films such as Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, Namaste London, Sing is King, Entertainment, Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham, Kabhi Alvida Na Kehna have been shown. Similarly, films such as Delhi 6, Delhi Valley, Oi Lucky, Lucky Oi, Fukre, Gangs of Wasipur, Zor Laga Ke Haisha have shown cities and cultural geographies of cities other than Mumbai. So let's conclude what we have learned through the discussion of city imaginations through Hindi cinema. The world of cinema is very vast and we cannot cover all the aspects. In this module, we have although covered the relationship between city and cinema at various levels. We have also discussed the cases from the West and India in order to comprehend this relationship. The relationship of finance and capital, urban social atmosphere, urban inhabitants. But for a large part of history of cinema, at least in Bollywood, Bombay was highly represented and screened. So in a sense, Bombay stood for the city in India. Similarly, in Hollywood, Los Angeles became the representative of American cities. We have also covered how cinema influenced the facets of topography of cities. It was the projected pictures that necessitated buildings designed specifically for showing films. So we have also discussed in Indian films that showcased physical and built-in environment and shown urban social relationships, urban mentalities, urban attitudes, and behavior, and of course urban landscapes. So nevertheless, there was a celebration of rural and often city life was denounced and criticized. The effort in this module help you to learn how cinema could be used for a better grasp of urban society and how urban social structure, urban landscape, and urban representation can be used to understand contemporary urban society. Lastly, we can say that film is a social formation, and watching cinema is a kind of ritual that has its gods and goddesses, where the charisma of stars depends on fans and fandom. Film viewing is a routine experience that creates lasting impact. Thank you.